These three true Chuck E. Cheese horror stories are inspired by real events. First, you'll hear about what happens when the last employee locking up for the night realizes he's not actually alone. Then, we'll cover how a mother's uneasy feeling about one of the mascots uncovers a terrifying secret that follows her family all the way home. And finally, there's the story of a horrifying discovery lurking at the bottom of a ball pit that sends multiple children to the hospital. You'll want to stick around for that final story, because when police finally catch the person responsible and ask them why they did it, their answer is the most chilling part of the entire tale. A kind of cold clings to you in Wisconsin, a damp chill that digs into your bones and promises a late spring. That was the air outside the Chuck E. Cheese that night. Inside, the back rooms had their own distinct smell, a mix of old grease from the pizza ovens and the sharp scent of cheap cleaner used to wipe everything down. The last of the kids and their parents had been herded out hours ago, leaving only the low, steady buzz of the arcade machines on standby. The main stage was dark, the big animatronic band silent for the night. Outside, the streetlights cut long, shivering shadows across the empty parking lot. A lonely place after midnight. Inside, it was just the four of them, finishing up the closing routine, same as any other night. Diana, the main manager, was up at the prize counter with Marcus, the shift leader. They were counting the day's cash, getting the deposit ready for the bank in the morning. The steady clicking of the keypad on the register was one of the only real sounds. That, and the occasional clank and whir of the big refrigerators in the kitchen, along with the faint thud of the old air conditioner kicking on and off. It was a rhythm they all knew, the sounds of the place going to sleep. In the back, Sarah and Trevor were tackling the greasy pizza station. Trevor was the newest employee, a quiet 17-year-old just trying to make some money for a car. He was still learning the rhythms of the place, how everything had its spot, how every night ended the same way. He was wiping down a stainless steel table, his movements slow and methodical, when he heard it. A faint click. It came from the service entrance, the heavy metal door that led out to the dumpster alley. He paused, a wet rag hanging from his hand, and just listened. The sound was too quick to be a staff member leaving. They always struggled with the sticky lock. And it was too quiet to be a customer. They were long gone. For a second, he just stood there, listening to the building settle around him. He figured it was just the old door making noises, or maybe the wind rattling the lock from the outside. The building was old, full of groans and creaks. He went back to his work. The sharp hiss of the cleaning spray bottle and the scrape of the rag on the metal table filled the silence in the kitchen. He had a job to do. Then a voice cut through the air. A man's voice, low and flat. "Bathroom now, no talking." Trevor froze solid. His heart gave a hard kick against his ribs, a sudden panicked beat that made it hard to breathe. A man was standing there in the dim light of the hallway that connected the kitchen to the main floor. He was wearing an old, faded Chuck E. Cheese uniform jacket, but something was wrong. Something was way off. His face was hidden in the shadow of a low-pulled baseball cap, and he was wearing dark work gloves. In his right hand, he held a black pistol. It was a cold and solid shape in the dim light, and it was pointed right at them. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to see when you're cleaning up after a kid's birthday party. The man took a step forward and motioned with the pistol. He didn't have to say anything else. The gun did all the talking. Trevor's eyes shot over to Sarah. She had dropped her cleaning rag and was staring at the man, her eyes wide with a kind of terror that makes a person go completely still. Without a word, they both shuffled out of the kitchen. In the hallway, Diana and Marcus were already standing there, their faces pale and drawn. The man had gotten to them first. He pointed with the gun to the employee restroom at the end of the hall. The room was tiny, a little box with white tile floors and a single toilet. It was meant for one person, maybe two if you squeezed. The four of them were shoved in, a tight, terrified huddle. The door swung shut behind them with a muffled click, and the quiet in that little room was suffocating. The only sound was the ragged, sharp breathing of four people crammed together. That, and the quiet shuffling of the man's boots on the tile floor just outside the door. Then, the door opened. He stepped inside, filling the doorway, and spoke again. His voice was low and carried a cold anger that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the air. Diana first. The small room felt like it was shrinking. Diana, her face a mask of pure shock and disbelief, looked up at him. She didn't say anything, but her eyes were pleading. The man didn't hesitate. A sudden crack, impossibly loud in that small space, ripped through the air. The sound was deafening, a sharp, violent echo that bounced off the tiles and felt like it tore the very air apart. Trevor saw Diana fall, her body just crumpling to the floor without a sound. Marcus, his face a twisted mix of rage and terror, lunged forward. "Why are you doing this, Felix?" he yelled, his voice raw and breaking. Another deafening crack. Marcus's body hit the tiled wall with a heavy, wet thud before sliding to the floor next to Diana. The smell of gunpowder was suddenly thick in the air, a sharp, bitter scent that burned your nose and the back of your throat. Sarah, her body shaking uncontrollably, began to cry. It was a high, whimpering sound, a sound of pure panic, and it was immediately cut short. A third crack, and she fell silent, collapsing onto the others. In that first moment of chaos, Trevor had instinctively dropped to the floor and curled into a tight ball, his arms clamped over his head. He was so terrified he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He just squeezed his eyes shut, trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear into the tile. He felt a sharp, searing pain tear through his stomach, a sudden burning sensation that knocked the air from his lungs with a choked gasp. He heard a final, dismissive crack, the bullet hitting the wall above him. It was followed by the sound of boots shuffling away from the room. Then, a final click as the hallway door swung shut. The room was silent again, except for the low buzz of the overhead fluorescent light and a slow, dripping sound of liquid hitting the tiled floor. Trevor lay still for what felt like an eternity. The burning in his stomach was intense, a steady throb that felt like a hot, twisting knife. He slowly, carefully uncurled his body, shaking with cold and shock. He opened his eyes. The world was a blurry, swirling mess of colors. He saw the others, still and silent on the cold tile. He knew he had to get out. Felix must have thought they were all dead. But Trevor was alive. Barely. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers scraping along the cold, smooth tile. He pulled himself up, using the base of the toilet for support. A low moan escaped his lips. He looked down and saw the dark, spreading stain on his shirt. He was bleeding. A lot. He had to move. Now. He dragged himself out of the restroom and into the hallway. The floor felt cold and slick beneath him. Each movement was agony, a new wave of fire shooting through his middle. He could see the faint, colorful lights of the game floor down the hall and knew he had to get there. There was a phone in the office. An alarm. He used the walls for support, his hand smearing a wet trail of blood on the painted cinder blocks as he pulled himself forward. He was moving in a crawl, inch by painful, agonizing inch. He dragged himself past the main stage, where the big animatronic mouse and his band stood silent and dark, their dead glass eyes seeming to follow him from the shadows. He pushed himself forward, his body screaming in protest with every single movement. He could feel himself getting weaker, the world at the edge of his vision turning dark. Finally, he reached the main office. The door was a few feet away, propped open. It looked like a mile. He had to get there. He gritted his teeth and pushed, a final, agonizing effort that made black spots dance in his vision. He reached the door frame and fumbled along the wall for the light switch. He flipped it on, and the office was bathed in a sudden harsh light that made him wince. He stumbled to the desk and saw it. The silent alarm button, a small square lifesaver mounted under the counter. With the last of his strength, he slammed his fist down on it. The quiet click of the button was a silent scream for help. Then he collapsed. His body finally gave in to the pain and the loss of blood. He fell to the floor near a pile of empty pizza boxes, a cheesy, familiar smell that was a jarring contrast to the metallic scent of his own blood that filled the air. He lay there, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and ragged, the quiet whirring of the machines from the other room the only sound. He knew help was coming. He just had to hold on. He listened past the sounds of the building for anything else. A distant wail at first. Then it grew louder, clearer. Sirens. They were coming. Louder and louder until they were finally there, their bright lights flooding the parking lot, washing the arcade in flashes of red and blue that pushed back the darkness. He had gotten out. And the final, sickening piece of the puzzle that clicked into place days later? The man in the cap, Felix, wasn't some random phantom from the night. He was a disgruntled former employee, fired just weeks before. He didn't just show up in a rage. He came with a plan. He wore the old uniform to belong. He knew the closing routine because it used to be his, and he knew exactly who would be there in the final, quiet moments of their shift. It wasn't a random act of violence, it was an appointment. Smells are tied to memory, but the scent of a place like that is something you can never truly wash away. It's a thick, sticky mixture of pizza grease, stale soda, and the faint, sweet scent of cheap candy. It clings to everything. A greasy film on the worn-out carpet and the faded plastic of the animatronic band on stage. For Michelle, this was just another Tuesday night. A profound sense of exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. Around her, the air was a humid mess, filled with a chaotic symphony of 100 screaming children. Dozens of arcade machines blared their own unique, repetitive electronic tunes, clashing into a wall of meaningless noise. A sad, mechanical rhythm from the creaking and groaning robots on stage played underneath it all, a forgotten bass line to the mayhem. She was running on fumes, watching her daughter, Haley, try to feed a plastic ticket into a buzzing arcade machine. The machine's bright lights flashed, but no prizes came out. A small whirring sound of a stuck gear was the only response. Haley let out a frustrated groan, the kind of sound that signaled an impending meltdown. Michelle sighed, digging in her purse for her debit card to buy another round of tokens. As she pulled out her wallet to check for the card, her gaze drifted across the room, taking in the scene of laughing families and running children. That's when she saw him. Across the arcade, a pair of unblinking eyes seemed to be pointed in her direction. They weren't the painted eyes of the bear on stage. They were the big, blank eyes of the Chuck E. Cheese mascot. He stood perfectly still by a row of skee-ball machines, his oversized head cocked slightly to the side. Amid the frantic energy of the room, his absolute stillness was unusual. His arms were held loosely at his sides, the cheap, fuzzy fabric of the costume showing no signs of life or movement. He didn't wave. He didn't dance. He just stood there, a silent statue in the middle of chaos. Michelle noted it as odd, an employee probably just taking a moment's break. She dismissed the strange sight, and turned her attention back to her daughter. A week later, that strange memory was gone, replaced by a much more immediate kind of terror. Her debit card was missing, and her bank account was empty. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. A series of small, strange purchases had drained her funds: a charge at a gas station, a few fast food orders, and a final purchase at a discount hardware store. She spent the better part of the day on the phone with the bank and the local police. The officer who took her report sounded bored, sighing audibly as she explained what happened. He called it petty card theft and told her to file a report online. But for Michelle, it wasn't petty. That card held the child support money she depended on to survive. A cold, fierce determination took hold. She decided to investigate it herself. Her first few stops were dead ends. She drove to a fast food restaurant from the bank statement and asked to speak to the manager. A teenager with a bad attitude told her the security cameras were broken. He shrugged and went back to his phone, leaving her standing there feeling helpless and invisible. Her hope began to fade. Just as she was about to give up, she tried the hardware store. The manager, a kind older man with sympathetic eyes, listened to her story and pulled up the footage. He fast-forwarded to the moment of the purchase, and there it was. For just a second, as the man reached for a tool on a high shelf, his baseball cap lifted. The face was blurry, but Michelle's breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to pound a heavy, frantic beat against her ribs. She recognized him. It was the quiet, unassuming employee she had briefly seen working in the back of the Chuck E. Cheese. She called the police again, this time insisting they meet her. 2 officers arrived in the restaurant's parking lot. The neon sign above the door made a faint crackling sound as it flickered, casting a sickly glow over their faces. One officer, a young woman named Jenna, listened intently to Michelle's story, her expression serious. Her partner, a jaded veteran, just sighed, clearly annoyed at what he saw as a waste of time. Inside, a birthday party was in full swing. The sound of children shrieking with joy echoed off the walls. They spotted the employee, Travis, cleaning a table. He moved with a calm, deliberate slowness that felt out of place. When he saw the police, a flicker of pure panic crossed his face. He quickly disappeared into a back room. A moment later, he re-emerged, wearing the full Chuck E. Cheese costume. The officers approached the giant mouse. Their faces were a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The veteran officer moved forward and took hold of the mascot's fuzzy, oversized arm. There was no real struggle, just a tense, silent effort as they guided the unresisting character towards the exit. The children's happy laughter faded into confused whispers. The tinny music from the animatronic band seemed to stutter and fail as an eerie silence fell over the room. The sight was deeply unsettling, a symbol of childhood joy being quietly and methodically led away by the police. A single child started to cry, a high, thin wail of confusion that broke the spell. Then others joined in. Parents scrambled to pull out their phones, recording the bizarre scene. The footage and the image of the mascot's head sitting on the hood of a police cruiser went viral. But it wasn't a joke. It was a deeply disturbing piece of footage, a chilling moment where the real world had violently intruded on a place of fantasy. For Officer Jenna, it was a grim confirmation that something was terribly wrong. At the station, Travis remained silent. He gave them his name, but nothing else. He denied everything about the credit card fraud. The evidence was thin, but the police had probable cause to search his phone. Under pressure, Travis finally gave them the passcode, a small, knowing smirk on his face. Officer Jenna was the one tasked with going through the device. She sat in a small, windowless room, the air stagnant and still. The only sound was the faint electric buzz of the old fluorescent lights overhead. She navigated to the photo gallery. At first, it looked normal, but then she saw a specific folder, separate from the others. Its title made a tight, icy feeling spread through her chest. It was labeled Party Treats. Her hands trembling slightly, she opened it. Inside, the contents were meticulously organized into subfolders, each one labeled with a date and a child's name. Haley's party. November 12th, Mark's birthday. November 19th. She clicked on the folder labeled Haley. The first photo was what she expected. A picture from the arcade of Travis in his costume, standing with a smiling Haley and her mother Michelle. But the second photo made her blood run cold. It was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of Michelle and Haley sitting on their couch at home, watching TV. The shot had been taken from outside, through a dark window. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She frantically clicked on the next folder. It was the same horrifying two-photo pattern. First, a happy picture of a family at the restaurant. Second, a secret photo of that same family inside their home, taken later that night from the darkness outside. The folder itself was the list. The true horror was in the details attached to each family's folder. Digital notes listing their address, their daily routines, and the weaknesses of their homes. One note read, Jenner house. Back door lock is old. Dog barks at 11 p.m. but stops. Bedroom window on left side, no curtain. The folder wasn't just a collection of photos. It was a hunter's catalog. This was never about the money. The credit card fraud was just a means to an end, a way to fund his dark obsession. He wasn't a simple thief. He was a hunter. He used the trust that came with the friendly costume to get close to families, to select them. The charges were upgraded to felony stalking and attempted burglary. The story of the mascot arrest went from a bizarre internet meme to a terrifying cautionary tale. For Michelle, the realization that the man behind the smiling mouse had been standing in the shadows of her own backyard, watching her family, was a final shattering blow. Now, every parent who hears the creak and sputter of an animatronic band might wonder who, or what, is really watching from behind the mask. Robert's job at the town's Chuck E. Cheese was a loop of predictable noise. A constant racket from the arcade games, the rumble of the skee-ball machine, and the high-pitched yells of kids fueled by sugar and pizza. He worked the prize counter, a small kingdom of cheap plastic he lorded over. The whole place had a worn-out feel, from the faded carpet to the sticky joysticks, but it was the only real spot for families in their small Arkansas town. He saw the same faces every week, part of the rhythm of the place. Among them was a quiet woman and her even quieter son. They were just part of the background, a mother who watched from a corner table while her boy sat silently in the middle of the ball pit, an island of calm in a sea of chaos. Robert barely gave them a second thought. The loop broke on a Wednesday. It started not with a sound, but with a smell. A foul, dusty odor began to hang in the air near the play area. It wasn't the usual scent of kids and stale food. It was a sickly sweet, sour smell that Robert couldn't place. He and the other employees noticed it immediately. The manager, Gary, just shrugged when Robert pointed it out. "It's an old building full of kids, Robert. It's always gonna smell like something weird," he said, not looking up. "Spray some of that citrus crap on it and forget about it." They overlooked it. They dismissed it. In a place like this, one weird smell was just part of the atmosphere. They didn't know what to think of it, so they thought nothing. A week later, the sickness began. It started small. A child would get a deep, barking cough and have to be taken home by a worried parent. Then it was another. With attendance plummeting and hushed rumors of sick kids all over town, Robert approached Gary again. "It's getting worse, man. The smell, the coughing. It's not normal," Robert insisted. This time, Gary didn't wave him off. He looked genuinely worried, his usual gruff demeanor cracked. "I know," he said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I know. What the hell could it be? The plumbing? Something in the vents? Maybe an animal died in the wall somewhere?" They were just throwing guesses into the dark, trying to find a logical reason for a situation that was rapidly spiraling into a nightmare. They had no idea that the real cause was far worse than a dead rat. Soon after, the Arkansas Department of Health arrived. Their presence made the fear official. Grim-faced investigators in jackets moved through the restaurant, their questions sharp and precise. They quickly found the common denominator. Every sick child had spent time in the ball pit. Immediately, the entire play area was sealed off. Wide, yellow caution tape was stretched across the entrance, the ripping sound echoing in the nearly empty building. It felt like a crime scene, but the perpetrator was invisible. A ghost. Robert watched as teams in full hazmat suits swarmed the pit, taking samples. The whole town held its breath, waiting for an answer, but the lab results only deepened the mystery. They found traces of a virulent contaminant, yes, but no source. There was no infestation in the walls, no environmental cause. The investigation stalled. The invisible enemy remained invisible, and the fear in town grew. Frustrated and out of options, the health department made one last-ditch effort. They installed small, hidden surveillance cameras focused on the cordoned-off play area. Their theory was that some nocturnal animal, something they had missed, was getting in at night. Gary, the manager, was tasked with reviewing the footage each morning. After a week of seeing nothing but darkness, he asked Robert to help, needing a second pair of eyes to watch the hours of silent, grainy footage. They sat in the small, cluttered back office, the glow of the monitor lighting their tired faces. They fast-forwarded through hours of black and white nothingness. It was mind-numbingly dull. Then, on the tape from the previous evening, they saw movement. Robert leaned in closer. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. The figure ducked under the yellow tape and walked calmly toward the ball pit. "Who is that?" Gary whispered, squinting at the screen. The figure stepped into a patch of light from the security lamps outside, and in that moment, the entire mystery snapped into horrifying focus. It was the quiet woman, the one from the corner table with the silent sun. Robert felt the air leave his lungs, an aha moment so brutal it felt like a punch. She was carrying a small bag. She stood at the edge of the pit, her movements calm and methodical. She reached into the bag and pulled out a handful of small, dark pellets. Robert and Gary stared, confused. They couldn't tell what they were. It didn't matter. With a chilling, casual ease, she scattered the unknown objects into the plastic spheres where children played. The deliberate, methodical nature of the act was unmistakable. She was poisoning the pit. Every quiet visit, the strange, detached look in her eyes. It all clicked into place, forming a picture of an evil so profound it was almost impossible to comprehend. She wasn't just a weird mom. She was the ghost they had been hunting. Gary immediately called the police. The woman was arrested within the hour. It was only then, from the breaking news report on the office television, that Robert and the rest of the world learned her name, Tasha. The police recovered the bag she had dropped, and lab tests later confirmed the horrifying truth. The small, dark pellets were rat droppings, teeming with hantavirus. When questioned, her motive, or lack of one, was the most chilling part. The lead detective on the case later said that when they asked her why she did it, why she would poison children. She just stared at them with those same empty eyes and said, "I don't know. I just wanted to." The restaurant was closed for good. The 3 sickest children survived, but with lungs that would carry the scars for the rest of their lives. For Robert, the memory of that grainy footage became a permanent fixture in his mind. It wasn't the disease that haunted him, or even the act itself. It was her reason. She didn't have one. He learned that evil doesn't need a grand plan or a twisted backstory. Sometimes it just shows up on a Tuesday afternoon, sits in the corner and decides to destroy lives for no reason at all.